Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As always, I'm here with Dr. Justin Smith.
Nice to be here.
How's life going for you?
Okay. Yeah, things are kind of progressing. School's moving along. It sounds like we're going to be face to face in the fall, so that's a good thing, I think. Good for the students, good for the faculty. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, life is. I don't know. Honestly, it feels a little repetitive. I'm kind of waiting for us to kind of break through with COVID a little bit, so that some of those things that we've enjoyed doing in the past, we can start doing again, traveling and whatnot. But yeah, things are good. How about you?
Doing pretty well. Just
Good.
growing the beard out. So
I like it.
what would you give it on a scale of 1 to 10 right now?
I have to give it a 10.
Wow.
I like the look personally.
All right.
People don't know this, but my wife actually requested this beard a number of years ago. She said, "Could you grow one?" And I said, "I'm not sure that I can." So this was an experiment. So I always.
How long have you had it?
I've had some form of this beard now probably for a few years, a couple of years,
Yeah.
2 or 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
And then she always gets frustrated if I trim it too much. So like every once in a while, I'll kind of cut it down a lot and kind of let it kind of restart. And she's not a huge fan of that.
Okay.
So she always makes comments about it. So
Yeah.
it's right about where I want it right now. So I just got to kind of keep it maintained.
Keep it in that space.
But you have way more coverage than I do. So I like what you got going on there. It looks good. It looks good.
Thank you.
It's a good look.
I did not expect a 10. We
10.
didn't talk about this earlier, so it wasn't
10.
like I was setting up.
Well, I'm very
that.
pro beard. So
Okay,
anyone
yeah.
who has a beard, unless it is just terribly, terribly misshapen or patchy, then I will go, hey, that's a 10. That's a 10.
I'll always remember I was trying to grow a beard in high school and could barely grow anything. And my English teacher, senior year, she looked at it and said, "I don't think you can call that a beard if you see huge patches of face." So
Yeah,
that was
right.
a little humbling moment in front of
Yeah.
the class. I'll always remember. So, yeah. So now, after that riveting conversation, let's get into the text. We are continuing our look at the book of Exodus, and we've just previously covered the plagues in Egypt and then the Israelites going through the Red Sea experience. And then shortly after that, they begin into a section that I would say gives me odd hope as a pastor, because leading a group of people is hard. And even though they've just experienced super profound things about God, this group of people is really good at complaining and grumbling. And I think about, as a pastor, just that's a part of my job. And I actually think our congregation is extremely generous in that. Some of my friends deal with way more grumbling and complaining than I do. So I'm thankful for the congregation that I serve at. But it's a part of leading people. Like what does it look like for us as a diverse group of people to come together and experience God's leading, and what that means for us as the people of God. I think about this as giving me hope, and also Jesus' disciples in the New Testament who Jesus himself pours into, and they're all like, peace, when the cross comes. Because just that it's one of those things, as you think about, I know you've talked about discipleship being an art, not a science, and that it is something that you grow in and understand, I think, at times through failure, and that's definitely true in my life, that there are things that I've been able to apply through my failure that I then go, all right, I need to learn from this moving forward.
Right.
And I think we get some of that in this section. I'll go ahead and read from Exodus chapter 16, starting in verse 1. And this is the beginning of manna being this gift from God. So in 16, verse 1, then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, or possibly Sinai, but interesting that it could be the wilderness of Sin, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived here on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. So this is not all that long. We're 1 month into this. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around with pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you've brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. And what I love about this passage is if you're dreaming about pots of meat, aka spam, then you probably got a problem. But then it continues. And the Lord says to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day the people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. I will test them to see whether or not they'll follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they will gather food, and when they prepare it, there'll be twice as much as usual. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, by evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought us out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints, which are against him, not against us. Mm-hmm. What have we done that you should complain about us? Then Moses added, the Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he's heard your complaints against him. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not against us. I love that Moses is very self-differentiated there, like the complaints are against God, not against us. And I think that actually is a helpful model to think about. But I find this interesting that we're just a month into life without slavery, and they're basically saying, wow, we ate really well back there. And again, it's pots of meat, so it doesn't sound all that delicious to me. But I find this journeying interesting. And it's not to say that this hasn't been hard. I mean, even walking through the Red Sea, that the tension of that moment as the Egyptians are coming and about to get them. I mean, it's one of those, it's tense. It's not necessarily easy. And they're able to escape, but it's not like it's tension-free or easy. And then as they continue to walk, it is hard. And I personally, I haven't had any time in my life where I'm wondering where my next meal is coming from. So I don't know how hard this is to be filled with anxiety about like a next meal, where's this going to come from? Next chapter, they're worried about water. I mean, this is real life stuff, and it's easy to look down on them and say, come on, you just had this profound experience. God has done this amazing thing for you. Shouldn't God be more real to you because of what's happened and what you've experienced? Like, surely you have like a deepening of your faith. But I think it's easy to look at that and not think about ourselves in the ways that we can so easily fall into this trap of God showing up exactly as we would want God to show up. Like and as you think about a community of people, first of all, that's problematic because everybody would want different things. And it's an interesting passage.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think some of this still goes back to this transactional nature between God and the people, and between gods and goddesses and people in the ancient world, right? So it really is, in the mindset of many, this "what have you done for me lately" relationship. In this crowded marketplace of worshiping gods and goddesses, the people could, again, sort of look at this and go, there are other gods and goddesses that we could be worshiping. They're the pantheon of gods and goddesses in Egypt that we just left. Our lives were better in Egypt. I mean, the fact that they're comparing this moment of freedom, or these moments of freedom, to slavery, and saying slavery was preferable because at least we were fed, is mind-blowing, I think, to me. But it also speaks of what I think is this growing relationship between the people and God. So God has this steadfast, deep, abiding connection to the people, right? Like, I am your God, you are my people. And everything that's sort of transpired as Exodus opens and moves us into the space is God claiming that relationship, owning that relationship, naming that relationship. And the people are looking at that and going, what does this relationship mean for us? What does it mean for us on a daily basis? We're enslaved. So you can't really care for us that much because we're enslaved. So God intervenes, frees them from slavery. Well, you can't really care for us that much because we don't have meat to eat and our basic needs aren't being taken care of, or at least not in the way that we want. So God intervenes there. Well, you can't really care for us that much because we're thirsty. So God intervenes there, right? So it's this way that the people are, I think, at times growing into this relationship, but in a way that feels really disrespectful, I think, to us. Mm-hmm. To go, God freed you. And they go, but we need more than that. And I don't know if that's the right response for them to have. I think it's a very human response for them to have. And I think, again, as we're critical of them, how critical are we of ourselves as we read this and go, we look at Israel and say, you're not thankful enough, you're not grateful enough. And then I think my question is, in what way are we like Israel?
Definitely.
Where we go, our relationship with God is transactional. I've done the things you've asked me to do. Where's my stuff? And then when God doesn't intervene in the way that we want, we're deeply critical of God, or we say God's not here. And so I think it's even us leaning into these processes of what does it look like to establish, maintain, cultivate, grow a relationship with God, even in the midst of really, really, really difficult things.
Yeah, and I think that something that's part of that for me, I think I would generalize this to most of Christianity. We aren't very much acknowledging the Holy Spirit as an aspect of God. If you go to most churches, and I would include ours in this, that generally there's going to be songs sung or preaching about God or preaching about Jesus or songs to that. And the Holy Spirit is mentioned sometimes in the songs we sing, or perhaps mentioned if I'm doing a series on the Holy Spirit perhaps, but I don't know that we do enough to say to our people, hey, this is the presence that Jesus promises that is even better than him. And I think it causes us, and I would raise my hand and include myself in this, to be almost functional atheists at times, where you, as you were saying a bit, you show up in the right place, you perform some rituals, you kind of say, all right, God, like I'm here, put me on the list for the week. But then how much are we really coming before God honestly and saying, God, I need this to change, I need this to work in me. And I think about that. It's easy to look at this story and go, yeah, you're dreaming about pots of meat. This is ridiculous. Yeah. You're dreaming about your slavery. But then as I think about my life and the sin patterns that I'm in, it's just easy to, pray about those things and say, all right, I want to try to change this. And then on Monday or Tuesday, it's a grind. And I choose that slavery or that addiction instead of walking in freedom. Yeah. I had the line about change. I never realized how hard change was until I tried to do it. And I think about a place that we could learn from is 12-step recovery groups, and how the beginning of those processes is just saying, I'm broken. I need help. I come to this meeting acknowledging that my life is out of control and I need God's leadership. And the fact is, everyone needs God's leadership in his or her life. And the problem is, I don't think even at church we don't always do a good job of really recognizing that. Yeah. And so we end up choosing slavery in our lives to stuff. And it's easy to look at this and go, this is ridiculous. You were like in slaves in Egypt, but then we put on the same shackles of our own life and say, I'm going to choose to do this even though I know it's not good for my health or it's not good for whatever, but I'm going to continue in this pattern. And in some ways, slavery to whatever it is that has you enslaved is comfortable. There's a reason why you do it. It's easy, and it's important for us to recognize ourselves in this and to go, all right, as I get to this point of where I'm trying to walk in faith, I don't know that I always do a good job when I'm in that space.
I think part of this thing is we want to be saved, but we can't be saved from fake danger. We can't be saved from fake peril. To be saved means that you are being rescued or saved from something that is dangerous, difficult, life-threatening, right? So in this way, it's sort of like, God, save us. And I think God is saying, I'm trying to, but it's also this recognition of you really have to be in a dangerous place to be saved, whether it's us thinking about our own sinfulness or what have you. So I'm looking at the Israelites and I'm going, God is saving them, but he's saving them out of this place that I think is life-threatening, and they don't even maybe fully grasp how life-threatening this is, right? And then I wonder, at least at points, I mean, and this is a hard theological concept to think about, and I'm not sure what I think about it fully, but is it even remotely possible that either God has to break us or we have to be allowed to be broken before we can be put back together? And I think there's part of this process for them where they are being broken, right? It is, they are breaking these old patterns, they are breaking these old ways of living, they are breaking their old expectations, or those expectations are being broken. And as all of these things are being broken, they are ultimately going to be rebuilt in this relationship and experience with God. But you have to break them first. And the breaking part is really, really hard and really, really painful and uncomfortable. And it makes us question God, and it makes us question God's presence. But I wonder about that at times, and I wonder about that in this narrative, where it's a complete reset of what you think about God and what you think about this relationship. And then this rebuilding, right, this wilderness experience becomes that experience out of which this group of people and their relationship with God is fully formed and forged. But you have to go through that first. And it's a hard sell, man. I mean, it's a really, really hard sell to tell somebody who's going through really, really difficult things that you have to go through these difficult things perhaps in order to come out the other side and have a deeper appreciation and a deeper relationship with God. I believe that because I've been through it. It's just a really, really hard sell. Yeah. It's a really hard thing to tell somebody. And I don't know if you do, and I don't know if we're supposed to tell people that or not. I don't know. But I've seen enough examples of it in Scripture, enough examples of it in my own life and in the lives of others that I would say this seems to be the case. And it's just a really hard part of what it means to be in a relationship with God.
Yeah, I think that's right. I totally agree that there's things in my life that have been incredibly hard that I would wish on nobody, but it has helped me grow in certain ways. And I think as I think about what it means to be in a church community, like most of us are in these two chapters most of the time, sure, in this wilderness space, and finding that right tension between just complete relationship with God and recognizing our utter dependence, and then growing in that moment and growing in trust. And frankly, it's hard. There's going to be times when your stomach feels empty, metaphorically or not. I mean, obviously there's some people who literally deal with that. And there's going to be times when you are really wondering, God, where are you? What's happening? And in that moment, are you willing to ask those questions, but then lean into God's presence even in that? And that's a challenge. It's a challenge for us. I mean, I think in some ways, the hardships that we are experiencing in this time of COVID during this year of just recognizing how out of control things are. And you mentioned probably students will be back in the fall. As a pastor, I'm hopeful for our church being able to show up and be together eventually. But it's just a whole lot of unknown, and we have more questions than answers. And I think for many of us, this is one of the first times in our lives where we feel this way. And I hope that in some ways we never forget what this feels like, that it is a part of walking with God and being a faithful person, just taking that next step and to really just live in this space of, God, I want you to lead me. I want you to provide for me. And God does in a really profound way in this story with manna. And I find that so fascinating that it's like, don't store it up. Just, I'm going to give you enough
for today. Yeah.
And I want you to have that for today. And I think about how like that's so profound to think about God's daily provision. And then also how even our very bodies function in that way of like, don't store up too much or else it's not going to be a good look for you. Right, as far as your own health and your own life, like, and you literally like through your bodies, like you have to think about that. It's about you saying, all right, I'm going to figure out what's enough, and then I'm going to trust in God for tomorrow. And that is hard for us because I think we live in a world where we are so independent and I think that's been probably what's most frustrating for everybody in the U.S. As far as COVID is, I used to be able to get to do exactly what I wanted. And now, for the good of others, I'm forced to reconsider that. And sometimes being told, no, you can't do that.
Yep.
And that's a tough pill to swallow for all of us.
Yep.
And even in that, can you say, all right, God, I'm going to trust you every single day? And that's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, it's this, I think it's also this idea of deeper reliance, right? What does it look like to rely completely on God every day for everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So much of how our lives are built and created is a move towards self-reliance, right? That's what being an adult in America is. It's moving out of your parents' home. It's getting a job. It's getting a well-paying job. It's paying all of your bills. It's paying back your student loans. Good luck with that. It's all of these things that are designed so that you stand on your own 2 feet. You pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? This rugged individualism to move home with your parents if you had to as an adult would be viewed by many as a failure, although that's becoming much more common now, so maybe there'll be a cultural shift there, right? It's this idea of doing everything on your own. And I think even here the Israelites are used to doing things on their own. We had food, we had bread. Yeah, our lives stunk in many ways, right? We had these really, really hard situations that we were living in, but there were things that we had control over, and there was a sense of power and determination. And now God is saying, I am here. I have you. Rely on me. Trust me. Don't trust me because we've never had a relationship. Trust me because of what I've already done, right? And I think that's the part about faith that's so powerful is we've adopted this idea of a blind faith. Nowhere in Scripture are we called to a blind faith. This is a God who calls us to faith through the relationship that we already have and through what he's already demonstrated, right? This is the God who delivered them out of Egypt, and he's saying, trust me. And they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, my 2 favorite examples from the New Testament are Peter and Thomas. Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking on water, right? Because he's had his eyes on Jesus. He's focused. It's then when he starts to look around and see the wind and the waves that he freaks out and starts to sink. Mm-hmm. His faith wanes, but his faith was built on a previous experience. Thomas the same way, right? Thomas has had a year or 2 or 3 with Jesus. He has seen him feed the multitudes. He has seen his activities. He's heard his words. He has a long-standing relationship with Jesus. Don't let this one moment shape what you think about me, Jesus is saying. Thomas, we've had all this time. God is saying to the Israelites, I have been your God. Your lack of faith is an indictment on the totality of this relationship, not this one moment, right? But I think that's part of the hard part is us looking beyond the moment that we're in to think about the life of this relationship and what we've experienced over time.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's just a constant learning experience, and I think you definitely see parallels with the feeding of the 5,000, for example, in John chapter 6, where Jesus feeds all these people, and the response of the people is, all right, we got a bread factory here.
Right.
And it says that he senses that they want him to be king. And so he's just like, peace, I'm not into that. But then later in that chapter, people are turning away from him because he isn't going to do exactly what they want. And that's something that I think we all need to sit with and say, all right, sometimes a miracle from God or this really great thing can in some ways be the worst thing for you, because then it's like, oh, cool, God, you did this for me. Now, where is it? Now, 10 minutes later, where is it? And Jesus is willing to do the miracle and God's willing to give the manna, but it's about this daily provision and this daily reliance. And so when the people then go, cool, like let's do this. And this was a very kingly act, because to be in that time and space when there was unbelievable poverty, it was a method of a king to go through a place and hand out some bread to basically say, hey, everybody, look at me, I'm a good person. And to have Jesus do this and to have this experience is something that is a challenge for us to think about, because then Jesus is like, nope, no, I'm not conforming to what you think I should be. And that's where I think we find ourselves often, as we have walked away from stuff that we're addicted to, or we have that is chaining us up. Then we need to say, all right, like, I am walking in freedom now. I'm on the other side of this. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy or exactly the way that I would want it to be. I am, though, choosing to walk on the other side because of who God is and what God has done. And there's something really profound there, but it's a challenge. If you've ever tried to do something that is taking you in a different direction, it's really hard. And what I think then that's important to see is this idea of grumbling and complaining. I love in Exodus chapter 17, the name that is given to the place where they complain about water is they give it the name Massah and Meribah, which means testing and quarreling. Like, it's just like, let's remember this.
Let's call it what it is.
Let's call it what it is. And I just think in my life and in my ministry, just across the board, there are things about my life that are hard. And if I choose to hone in on those, I have reasons to complain, perhaps legitimately, and others have way more reason than me. But I can choose to say, all right, this is hard. This is a tough situation. And something that I've learned through time and many good conversations with my wife is we've realized that there's often going to be things that aren't perfect about our lives or whatever, and we can choose to sit and just focus on that thing. I've had, a canker sore in my mouth ruin my day, because it just hurts. And if you just think about it, it can be something that just drives you crazy. But are you going to focus on the thing that is a struggle, or are you going to look with bigger eyes and say, all right, I'm going to choose to look at other things? And something that I think my wife and I have learned is just sitting there and talking about that thing. It's just not healthy or helpful. I had a mentor one time say to me as I was just talking about a stressful situation with him probably 7 years ago or so. And he said, well, are you talking about this much with your wife? And I said, yeah, probably a little bit too much. And he said, what you need to think about is opening up that conversation. Is that selfishly for you? And I had to go, yep. And so I've tried to do better about thinking, all right, I could talk about this thing that is frustrating or whatever, and we could spend the next 3 hours of our evening talking about it. And what I've learned over time is that really not anything is solved in those conversations. Like, it's kind of this, just very much like this, like kind of a complaint fest, and you can just focus in and hone in on that, but not a lot of productive stuff has ever happened in those moments. And it was really helpful for my mentor to tell me that, and something that I've tried to learn from, and something that I see here is, oh, we don't have enough food. Oh, if only we could go back. And then God miraculously acts, and I don't think the people then are celebratory enough. It's like God says, all right, I'm hearing this, and I'm going to act on this. Not in the way that you want. You're not going to get a 5-course meal and like filet mignon. You're going to get it's actually good tasting bread, apparently, maybe the best bread ever. But like this idea of God showing up, and then I think that the people then don't even celebrate that enough. And say, all right, great. And let's have, 5 chapters of celebration. Then maybe you fall back into it, but it's like then immediately it's like, well, where's the water? And it's this, if you have that attitude, and I've just learned this through time, that negative people are negative, and people who have complained about our church, sometimes in justified ways, they're just negative about all aspects of their life. It's not just like, oh, this one thing. It's a lens that you see your life through. And if you're gonna do that, it's killing you.
Yeah. I think it's this issue that we have with micromanaging God's salvation, or the way that we want to micromanage God's intervention. So we call out to God, we cry out to God, God, intervene in my life. God says, okay. And then we go, well, that's not the way I wanted you to intervene.
Yeah.
What I really wanted you to do was this. I had a conversation literally yesterday with a student who had reached out to me over the weekend, been dealing with some different things, and part of the conversation, or part of the email was, I'm going through some hard stuff and I don't really feel God, God's presence, and I'm not sure God's here. So as we're talking, he said, yeah, so the other night when I emailed you, I know it was kind of late, but I was getting ready to go out and do some stuff I know I shouldn't do. And there was something, that kind of said, well, why don't I email my professor? And I go, that's God in that moment. It may be not the way you wanted God to manifest, or maybe not the way you wanted God to be there. I go, we've had class for 7 weeks. You barely know me. And something in all of this drew you into saying, maybe I should reach out to my professor and ask him if he would be willing to talk and kind of communicate with me on this. And so here the people are. We've left the wilderness. We're free. And we want to be taken care of. We want help. God, please help us. God says, fine. Here's this. Well, that's not what we wanted, And it's this, again, this ongoing process of breaking these expectations, of saying, God is here. God is powerful. God is intervening. And just because he doesn't intervene the way that we want him to intervene doesn't mean he's not intervening and he's not present. And for people who take a lot of pride in our abilities to affect ourselves and affect others, for our freedoms, our choices, our myriad choices, to live in a space with restricted choice is something that feels very forsaken, but it's not. And I think that's a hard move for a lot of us to make. And I think this is why this particular narrative and these narratives with Israel become and remain so powerful for us and so challenging for us. Because here we are in these difficult times, and for many of us, our complaints are based around not that God isn't intervening, but he's not intervening in the way that we want. Or not that God isn't intervening, it's that our choices are limited, and that somehow feels oppressive. And I get it. I understand.
Yeah.
I'm a very independent, my wife will tell you can't tell me nothing. We have a wonderful relationship. We communicate well, but if you tell me I can't do something, that is just an invitation for me to do that thing more often than not. So this idea of restriction and what have you is something I think that puts us in a position to again reset our expectations and to refocus on the God who suffers with us, not just for us, and the God who saves, but God who saves in his way and in his time.
And I think that story is interesting. I've heard it said that it's like, oh, I really want the presence of God. I want God to show up. But that student sending you that email, right as he was going to do something that he knew he shouldn't do, he kind of had this bit of guilt perhaps, or whatever it is. And it's, I want the presence of God. But I've heard it said, well, you also want a God to be absent sometimes, like on that spring break trip, or that time when you were gonna go do something and you felt that twinge of guilt and thinking, oh, I want God here, but I don't want God over here. And that idea of, I want to submit myself and my life to your presence, God. Move in me. And then it's like, but not right now. Let me go have a few hours to myself.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that, like, I think at times we think of ourselves as these like really independent beings, but in reality, we're slaves to so much stuff. Yeah. And we need to be honest about those things and then ask God to really work in us. But that takes like hard work of the soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are out of time for this evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Justin, as always, for this conversation. And I hope that as you consider your life and faith, you'll allow God to lead you and to be honest about your struggles and how God can do miraculous things in you. If you want to join us for our Zoom call in just a few seconds, you can email me, Brian with a Y, at glendale.church. Thank you for joining us this evening.